My father laughed before he even finished reading the invitation. Not a polite little chuckle. Not the kind people use when they do not know what else to say. It was the full, dismissive laugh I had heard my whole life whenever I wanted something too tender, too meaningful, or too far outside the narrow list of things he considered impressive. He sat at the kitchen table in my parents' house, holding the cream-colored envelope between two fingers like it was junk mail. "A national award ceremony?" he said, looking over the top of his glasses. "Emily, you're a teacher, a lowly teacher. What exactly are they giving you? A gold star?" My sister Victoria didn't even glance up right away. She was scrolling through her phone, one manicured thumb moving lazily across the screen. When she did look up, it was only to ask, "What day is it?" "October 15th, I said. She gave a small shrug. "Mark and I already have dinner plans." That was it. No pause. No, let me see if we can move things around. Just dinner plans. As if the most important night of my career belonged in the same category as a reservation and a bottle of wine. My mother stood by the stove stirring a pot of soup. For one small, fragile second, I waited for her to say something. Anything. She didn't. She only lowered her eyes and kept stirring. And somehow, that silence hurt more than my father's laugh. Because if this feels familiar to you, you already know this kind of pain rarely comes from strangers. It comes from the people who had the first chance to love you well and decided not to learn how. I folded my hands in my lap so they would not see them shaking. The invitation had taken me 2 weeks to open, 2 more days to believe. National Teacher of the Year finalist, Washington, D.C., a formal ceremony, cameras, press. The kind of recognition most teachers never even let themselves dream about. But sitting there in my parents' kitchen, with my father smirking and my sister checking the time, it suddenly sounded small, embarrassing even. I forced a smile and said the only thing I could say without breaking in front of them. "All right. And if respect matters, subscribe." What none of them knew was that 48 hours later, while they sat in a restaurant laughing over candlelight and expensive plates, my father would look down at his phone, go completely pale, and whisper 4 words he had never said about me before. "What is this, Emily?" I didn't cry that night. That's the part people always expect to hear differently. They imagine some quiet breakdown, maybe me sitting on my bed, staring at the invitation while tears fall onto the paper like in a movie. But I didn't cry. I just went home, placed the envelope carefully on my kitchen table, and sat down in the silence of my one-bedroom apartment. The kind of silence you get used to when no one is waiting for you, and no one is wondering where you are. I stared at that invitation for a long time. National Teacher of the Year finalist. Even now, alone, it felt too big to say out loud. Because some of you listening know what it's like when your achievements feel real everywhere, except in the one place you wanted them to matter. My phone buzzed. A message from the family group chat. Victoria had sent a photo her and Mark at some rooftop restaurant, city lights behind them, both of them dressed like they belonged on the cover of something expensive. "Celebrating early tonight," she wrote, followed by a champagne emoji. My mother liked the message. Of course she did. I turned my phone face down. There's a moment, and it doesn't look dramatic from the outside, when something inside you quietly shifts. Not breaks. Just stops reaching. That was the moment for me. I got up, walked to my bookshelf, and pulled out a folder I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten notes from students. Some in careful pen. Some in messy pencil. Some barely readable. "Thank you for not giving up on me. You're the first teacher who listened. I didn't think I was smart before your class." I sat back down on the floor, surrounded by those letters, and for the first time that day, my chest loosened. Not because my family believed in me, but because these kids did. And somehow, that had always been enough, even if I kept pretending it wasn't. If you know what it's like to be seen everywhere except at home, you don't need me to explain why this part hurts the most. You've already lived it. My phone buzzed again. This time, a different name. Grandma Evelyn. I answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm in a way that made something inside me soften instantly. "I heard." I frowned slightly. "Heard what?" "That you were nominated," she said gently. "You didn't think that would stay quiet, did you?" I let out a small breath. I wasn't sure anyone would care. She paused. Then, very calmly, she said, "Oh, Emily, the right people always do." There was something in my grandmother's voice that made me sit up straighter. Not excitement. Not surprise. Something steadier than that. Like certainty. What do you mean you heard? I asked quietly. She let out a soft breath, the kind that carried a smile with it. Emily, news like that travels in education circles faster than you think. I glanced back at the invitation on my table. I haven't told anyone except… I stopped. Except the people who didn't care. She didn't make me say it. I'm coming, she said. To Washington. Yes. You don't have to fly all that way. I know, she interrupted gently. I want to. There was no hesitation in her voice. No scheduling conflict. No polite excuse wrapped in kindness. Just a decision. And something about that, how simple it was for her to choose me, made my throat tighten in a way I wasn't prepared for. I'll sit in the front row, she added. Right where you can see me. I closed my eyes for a second, because if you've ever spent your life trying to earn a seat in someone's attention, you recognize immediately when someone gives it freely. Thank you, I whispered. There was a pause. Then she said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. Emily, did you read the letter carefully? I frowned slightly. Yes. All of it? I hesitated. I think so. The part about the nomination, she said softly. About the person who submitted your name. My eyes drifted back to the envelope. The embossed seal, the formal language. The line I had read a dozen times but never fully sat with. A distinguished educator. Identity to remain confidential until the ceremony. Yes, I said slowly. She hummed, almost to herself. Whoever nominated you, she continued, believes in you deeply. People don't make recommendations like that lightly. My chest tightened again, but this time, it wasn't from hurt. It was something else. Something unfamiliar. What if I don't win? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Her answer came without a second of delay. That's not the point. I let that settle, because she was right. Winning had never really been the thing I was chasing. It was being seen, being taken seriously, being told just once that what I chose to do with my life actually mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was already happening. Emily, she said again, softer now, focus on your speech. I've rewritten it like 10 times already. She chuckled lightly. Then rewrite it one more time. Not for the committee, not for the cameras. For who? For the person you were, when no one was clapping yet. I didn't answer right away, because that version of me, she had been very quiet, very tired, but she had kept going anyway. After we hung up, I sat there in the stillness of my apartment, the city humming faintly outside my window. And for the first time since that dinner, I didn't feel small. I felt anchored, like something was shifting into place, slowly, quietly. The kind of change no one notices at first, until everything is different. The next morning, I almost didn't send the message. I had rewritten it so many times it barely felt like mine anymore. Too long felt desperate. Too short felt like I didn't care. Too formal sounded cold. Too emotional sounded like I was begging. So I sat there at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, staring at my phone like it might decide for me. Hi everyone, I have some news. Delete. Hey, I wanted to share something important. Delete. At some point you realize the message itself isn't the hard part. It's what you're hoping will come back. I finally typed, Hi everyone. I've been selected as a finalist for National Teacher of the Year. The ceremony is October 15th in Washington, D.C. It would mean a lot to me if you could be there. I attached the invitation. Love, Emily. I read it 3 times. Simple, clear, no over-explaining. Still, my thumb hovered over the send button, because some of you listening know that pause. That exact moment where your entire past is sitting behind one small action. Every time they didn't show up, every time they dismissed you, every time you told yourself, maybe this time will be different. I pressed send. Then I waited. I cleaned the apartment, checked my phone, graded papers, checked again, turned on the TV. Didn't watch it. Checked again. Nothing. By midnight, all 3 of them had seen the message. No replies. I fell asleep with my phone next to me, screen still lighting up every few minutes from things that didn't matter. The next morning, at 7:42, I woke up to a notification. Dad was typing. 3 gray dots. Gone. Back again. Gone. Then finally, a message. Just a teacher's award. Not flying across the country for that. I stared at it. Once, twice, 3 times. It didn't change. The words just settled deeper. Before I could even process it, another message appeared. Victoria. Sorry, Em. Mark and I already have dinner plans that night. Can't cancel. It's important. You understand. That smiley face. That might have been the worst part. I waited. Still. For my mom. For anything. A defense. A softening. We'll figure something out. Instead, Diane liked Victoria's message. That was it. No words. Just agreement. I set my phone down slowly. Picked it up again. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Then finally, I wrote. That's fine. And if you've ever had to shrink your own moment just to survive someone else's indifference, you know exactly how heavy those 2 words can feel. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there. Very still. Like something inside me had quietly decided this was the last time I would ask. I turned my phone off after that. Not on silent. Not face down. Off. Like I needed the world and especially them to stop existing for a while. That day at school felt different. Not because anything had changed around me, but because something inside me had. Room 214 looked the same. Same chip desks. Same whiteboard I had cleaned 1,000 times. Same wall covered in thank you notes from students who had nothing to give except words. But for the first time, I wasn't thinking about whether my family would ever understand what I did here. I was just present. Miss Carter, one of my students, Lily, said as she hovered by my desk after class, "Are you okay?" I blinked, a little surprised. "Of course. Why?" She shrugged, shifting her backpack higher on her shoulder. "You're quieter today." I smiled softly. "Just thinking." She nodded like that made perfect sense. Kids don't need long explanations. They notice what adults ignore and accept what adults complicate. "Okay," she said. Then she paused. "Well, I think you're the best teacher I've ever had." It wasn't dramatic. She didn't cry. She didn't hug me. She just said it, like it was obvious. And then she left. I sat there for a second after the door closed. Because sometimes, the smallest moments land the hardest, especially when they come without conditions. If you've ever been unexpectedly seen on an ordinary day, you know how quietly powerful that can feel. After school, I stayed late like I always did, grading papers, rewriting tomorrow's lesson, straightening desks no one would notice. This wasn't new, but the way I felt about it was, for years I had carried this quiet need for it to mean something more. For someone, my parents, mostly to look at my life and say, yes, this matters. But sitting there in that empty classroom, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. It already did. They just weren't the ones who would ever say it. My phone turned back on around 7 p.m. Notifications flooded in. Missed calls. Messages. But not from them. From colleagues. From the school district. From people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Just heard about your nomination. This is huge. So proud of you, Emily. You deserve this more than anyone I know." I scrolled slowly, almost carefully, like I didn't want to rush past something important. Because for the first time, the voices that filled my phone weren't dismissing me. They were recognizing me. And somewhere between those messages and Lily's quiet words earlier that day, I felt something settle into place. Not validation, something stronger than that. Clarity. I didn't need to convince everyone. Just the people who were already willing to see me. 2 days before my flight, my mom called. I almost didn't answer. Her name sat there on my screen, lighting up my quiet apartment, and for a moment I just watched it ring, like it belonged to someone else's life. Then I picked up. "Hi, Mom." "Emily, sweetheart," she said quickly, like she was already halfway into another conversation. "We're having dinner Sunday. Your father wants the whole family there." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "I leave for Washington Monday morning." "It's just dinner," she replied. "Victoria has exciting news." Of course she did. There was always something to celebrate for Victoria. Something big, something worthy, something that made everyone show up. "I really need to pack," I said. "It won't take long," she insisted. "Be here at 6. And just like that, it wasn't a question anymore. It never really was. If you grew up in a family where your no was treated like a suggestion, you know how quickly your boundaries get negotiated away. "Okay," I said quietly. Sunday night, their house looked exactly the same. Perfect lawn, perfect lighting, perfect version of a family that worked from the outside. Inside, the dining table was already set with the good china, candles, crystal glasses, the kind of setup reserved for moments that mattered. Victoria sat at the head of the table, glowing. "Emily," she said, standing just enough to air kiss my cheek. "So glad you could make it." Mark gave me a small nod. He looked like he always did around my family present, but slightly removed. Dad raised his glass before I even sat down. "To Victoria," he announced proudly. "Youngest partner in her firm's history." There it was. The exciting news. Everyone clapped. Mom beamed. Victoria smiled like she had been waiting for this exact moment her whole life. And maybe she had. "That's incredible," I said, meaning it. Because it was. But I also knew what was coming next. Dad leaned back in his chair, looking at me now. "So, Emily," he said, "what's new with you?" I held his gaze. "I told you. The ceremony is Tuesday." He waved his hand like he was brushing away something insignificant. "Right. That little teacher thing." Little. That word landed softly, but it stayed. Victoria tilted her head slightly. "So, what exactly does a teacher make these days?" There it was. Not curiosity. Comparison. "Around 52,000, I said calmly. She let out a small laugh, glancing at Mark. "That's less than my monthly bonus." No one corrected her. No one said it wasn't the point. Dad nodded. "This is what we've been trying to tell you, Emily. You're smart. You could have done more." I set my fork down gently. "I did do something," I said. And for the first time that night, my voice didn't shrink. "I chose this." The table went quiet for a second. Just a second. Then the conversation moved on. Like it always did. But something had changed. Not them. Me. And if you've ever had that moment where you stop defending your life and just stand in it quietly, you know that's where everything begins to shift. Dessert was served, but I hadn't tasted anything. Not the food. Not the wine. Not even the tension that hung in the air like something no one wanted to name. "I should go," I said, reaching for my coat. Mom looked up, surprised. "Already? We haven't even talked about Victoria's celebration party next month." "I'll check my schedule," I replied. Victoria smirked slightly. "Busy, are we? Flying first class to your little ceremony?" I paused. Not because I was hurt. Because for the first time, I wasn't. "The Department of Education is covering the travel," I said calmly. "First class." The table went quiet. Not loud silence. Sharp silence. Dad's fork stopped midair. Mom blinked. Even Victoria's expression shifted just slightly, but enough. "For a teacher award?" Dad asked. "It's a national award," I said, meeting his eyes. "Presented by the Secretary of Education." I let that sit there. Not to prove anything. Just to stop minimizing it for them. Because I had been doing that for years. "Well," Victoria said, recovering quickly. "That's nice." "Nice." I nodded once, then slipped on my coat. "Congratulations again," I said. "I mean that." And I did. Then I walked out. No slam doors. No dramatic exit. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that follows you when you finally stop trying to be heard by people who already decided not to listen. The drive home felt longer than usual. No music. Just the low hum of the engine and my thoughts catching up with me. At a red light, my phone buzzed. An email. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. "Miss Carter, this is Sarah Mitchell from CNN's Education Desk. We would like to request a brief interview prior to Tuesday's ceremony." I read it twice. Then a third time. CNN. For a second, I just sat there staring at the screen, like my brain hadn't caught up yet. My family thought I was going to some small, forgettable event. A certificate. A handshake. A polite clap. They had no idea. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to correct them. If you've ever reached a point where explaining yourself feels more exhausting than being misunderstood, you know exactly what that silence means. I put my phone down. The light turned green. I drove the rest of the way home with something unfamiliar settling in my chest. Not anger. Not even sadness. Distance. Not physical. Something quieter. Cleaner. Like I was stepping out of a version of myself that had been waiting too long. That night, I packed my suitcase. One dress. One pair of heels. My speech, folded carefully. And the invitation, placed right on top. Not as proof. Not anymore. Just as a reminder. I was going. With or without them. Monday morning came quietly. No dramatic send-off. No last-minute calls from my parents. No sudden change of heart. Just sunlight slipping through my blinds and the soft hum of a day that felt important, even if no one in my family was acknowledging it. I stood in my apartment for a moment before leaving, suitcase by the door, keys in my hand. This place had seen everything. The late nights, the quiet birthdays, the moments I questioned every choice I had made. And now, it was seeing me leave for something I had earned. Not something given. Not something inherited. Earned. The ride to the airport was uneventful, but my mind wasn't. It kept drifting back to the dinner, to my father's laugh, to that word again. Lowly. It used to echo. Now it just sat there. Powerless. Because words only hold weight when you still need approval from the person saying them. And I was starting to realize I didn't. At the airport, everything felt slightly unreal. Check-in was smooth. Security quick. And then, Miss Carter? I turned. A woman in a navy uniform smiled warmly. We'll be boarding you with first class shortly. There was no hesitation in her tone. No doubt. Just recognition. I nodded. Thank you. It was a small moment, but it landed. Because respect, when it's genuine, doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't ask you to explain your worth first. It just meets you where you are. The flight itself was quiet. A glass of champagne I barely touched. A seat that reclined further than I was used to. A flight attendant who addressed me like I belonged there. I spent most of the time looking out the window. Clouds stretching endlessly beneath me. Somewhere between takeoff and landing, something inside me settled again. Not excitement. Not nerves. Clarity. I wasn't going to Washington to prove anything. Not to my parents. Not to Victoria. Not even to myself. I was going because this was where my path had led. Simple as that. When we landed, a driver was waiting. A black car, my name on a small sign. For a second, I almost looked behind me, like maybe there was another Emily Carter he was expecting. But there wasn't. It was me. The hotel was everything I wasn't used to. Marble floors. Soft lighting. People who greeted me before I even spoke. Welcome, Miss Carter. Your suite is ready. Sweet. I let that word sit for a moment. Then I nodded and followed. The room overlooked the city. Washington stretched out in quiet confidence, monuments, lights, history layered into every direction. I set my suitcase down slowly, walked to the window, and just stood there. 3 days ago, I had been sitting at my parents' table, shrinking myself into something easier for them to accept. Now, I was here. Not because they believed in me, but because I had kept going, even when they didn't. And that difference, it was starting to matter more than anything they had ever said. The hotel room was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Not empty. Not lonely. Just calm. I placed my suitcase near the bed, then sat down slowly, like I needed a second to catch up with where I was. Washington, D.C. Finalist. Tomorrow, I would walk into a room filled with people who didn't need to be convinced that what I did mattered. That thought alone felt unfamiliar. My phone buzzed. I already knew who it was before I looked. Dad. I let it ring. Then it stopped. A second later, Mom. Then Victoria. 3 calls, back to back, like they had suddenly remembered I existed. I stared at the screen for a moment, then turned the phone over. Not out of anger. Just timing. There are conversations that don't deserve access to you the moment they decide to show up. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to answer. A soft knock interrupted the silence. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Emily. Grandma Evelyn stood there, her posture straight, her expression warm but steady, like she had been expecting this moment long before I had. Grandma, I said, and before I could stop myself, I stepped forward and hugged her. She held me tightly. Not briefly, not politely, fully. I'm so proud of you, she said quietly. I swallowed hard. Thank you for coming. I wouldn't have missed this, she replied. She stepped inside, looking around the room with a small nod of approval. They're treating you well. They are, I said. She turned back to me, her eyes sharper now. As they should. There was something grounding about her presence. She didn't make things bigger than they were. But she also never made them smaller. We sat by the window, the city glowing behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Your parents called me." I exhaled softly. I figured. "They're surprised," she added. That word almost made me smile. Surprised. As if everything that had led to this had happened overnight. "I'm not calling them back tonight," I said. She nodded once. "Good. No lecture. No, they're still your family. Just agreement. Because some of you listening know support doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it's just someone not pushing you back into something you finally stepped away from. There's something else," she said after a moment. I looked at her. "The nomination," she continued. "Do you remember what the letter said?" "Yes. That the person who submitted your name has only nominated a handful of teachers in their lifetime." I felt my chest tighten slightly. "Yes." She held my gaze. "They don't choose lightly." Something in the way she said it made my heart beat a little faster. "Grandma," I started. She smiled, but didn't answer directly. "Tomorrow," she said, standing slowly. "Just walk on that stage and be exactly who you've been all along." She moved toward the door, then paused. "And Emily?" "Yes? The right people have already been watching." The door closed softly behind her. I stood there for a long moment. Then I turned back toward the window. The city hadn't changed. But something inside me had. Tomorrow wasn't about being seen for the first time. It was about finally understanding that I already was. The morning of the ceremony arrived without noise. No dramatic music. No overwhelming rush. Just a quiet kind of awareness. Like the day already knew what it meant, even if I was still catching up. I woke up before my alarm. For a moment, I stayed still, staring at the ceiling, letting everything settle. Washington. The ceremony. The stage. And somewhere miles away, my family, completely unaware of what this day actually was. I got ready slowly. Not because I was nervous, but because I didn't want to rush through something I had worked years to reach. The dress hung neatly by the window, simple, elegant, nothing flashy, just enough to feel like myself, not someone trying to impress a room. Because that was the difference now. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. Downstairs, the hotel lobby was already alive with quiet movement. Other finalists stood in small clusters, dressed just as carefully, holding that same mix of composure and disbelief. I recognized them from the briefing email. Michael, Priya, David. People who had spent years doing what I did, in different classrooms in different cities, but with the same quiet commitment. "Emily?" a voice said. I turned. Priya smiled warmly. "I'm so glad I found you. I feel like I already know you from your nomination file." I laughed softly. "Same here." There was no competition in that room. No tension. Just recognition. Like we all understood something most people didn't. "How are you feeling?" Michael asked. I thought about it for a second. "Calm," I said. And it surprised me a little that it was true. Because some of you listening know, real confidence doesn't feel loud. It feels steady. Like you're not trying to prove anything anymore. A coordinator approached us shortly after. "They're ready for you backstage." We followed her through a side hallway, away from the main entrance. The closer we got, the quieter everything became. The kind of quiet that holds weight. Backstage, the lights were softer. The sounds from the ballroom came through in low waves, voices, movement, anticipation. I stood near the curtain, just out of view. My hands were still, my breathing even. And then, I heard my name. Not announced. Spoken. "Miss Carter?" I turned. A production assistant handed me a small microphone pack, clipping it gently to my dress. "You'll enter from the left when your name is called," she said. "Just follow the light. Follow the light." I nodded. Then, almost without thinking, I stepped closer to the curtain and looked through the narrow opening. And for a moment, everything stopped. Rows of tables stretched across the ballroom. Hundreds, no, thousands of people. Cameras positioned at every angle. And right in the front row, I saw her, Grandma Evelyn, sitting tall, watching the stage, waiting, not distracted, not checking her phone, just there. For me, my chest tightened slightly, but not from fear, from something steadier, something that had taken years to build. The announcer's voice echoed through the room. "Please welcome our finalists." I stepped back from the curtain, closed my eyes for half a second. then opened them again. And when my name was called, I walked forward, not to prove them wrong, not to be seen for the first time, but as someone who finally understood. I had already become everything they said I wasn't. The light hit me before the applause did. Warm, focused, unavoidable. For a split second, everything outside that beam disappeared, the audience, the cameras, the weight of the moment. It was just me, stepping forward, one step at a time, into something I had spent years building without ever knowing this moment would exist. Then the sound came. Applause, not polite, not forced, full. I walked across the stage, aware of every step but not overwhelmed by it. My name echoed again through the room, clearer this time, carried by a voice that treated it like it belonged there. Emily Carter. I nodded slightly as I reached my place beside the other finalists. Priya gave my hand a quick squeeze. Michael smiled. David closed his eyes for a brief second, like he was grounding himself. We were all standing there, not as competitors, but as people who had made it through years of being overlooked. That's something most people don't see. Recognition doesn't erase what came before it. It just reveals it. The host began speaking, his voice steady, practiced. Tonight we honor educators who have gone beyond the classroom. I listened, but not in the way I thought I would. I wasn't hanging on every word. I wasn't waiting for validation. Because standing there, I already felt something I hadn't expected. Enough. Then the next part began. Before we announce the recipient, he continued, each finalist will hear from someone whose life they have impacted. My heart shifted slightly. This part, I hadn't prepared for. A name was called. Not mine. A teacher stepped forward. A former student spoke. The room softened, then rose again in applause. Then another. And another. Each story different, but somehow the same. Teachers don't always see the full impact of what they do. Not right away. Sometimes, not ever. Then, please welcome, representing Miss Emily Carter. Everything in me stilled. Marcus Thompson. The name hit before the image did. Marcus. For a second, my mind couldn't place him. And then, I saw him, walking toward the microphone. Taller, older, composed, but unmistakable. The same eyes. The same quiet intensity. Years ago, he used to sit in the back of my classroom, barely speaking, always watching. He had come to school hungry more days than not, wore the same hoodie through winter, turned in assignments written on scraps of paper, and somehow, he was here. Now, in a suit, standing in front of a room full of people. My throat tightened. He reached the microphone, adjusted it slightly, and looked out at the audience. Then, he looked at me. And in that moment, everything else disappeared again. Not because of the lights, but because of what was about to be said. When I was 16, he began, his voice steady. I didn't think I was going to make it to 18. The room went silent, completely, and I felt it. Not nerves, not fear, something deeper, because I knew this wasn't about an award anymore. This was about truth. When I was 16, Marcus said, I was living in my car. No one moved. No clinking glasses. No shifting chairs. Just silence, the kind that makes people listen whether they want to or not. My mom was in prison, he continued. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Most days I didn't eat. Most nights I didn't sleep. I felt my chest tighten. Not because I didn't know this. Because I did. I had seen it back then in pieces. The way he avoided eye contact. The way he flinched when someone moved too fast. The way he always said he forgot his homework, when really, he just didn't have paper. But hearing it now out loud, in this room it carried a weight I hadn't fully understood at the time. I had already decided school didn't matter, Marcus said. Nothing did. He paused. Then he looked at me again. And then I walked into Miss Carter's class. The room softened, just slightly. She didn't ask me what was wrong, he said. She didn't make me explain anything I wasn't ready to say. A small breath left my chest. Because that had always been the line I tried not to cross. Help, without exposing. Care, without making it visible. But she noticed, he continued. She noticed everything. My hands were still, but inside, something was unraveling. She started leaving snacks in her desk, he said. Never handed them to me directly. Just made sure they were there. A quiet murmur moved through the audience. She stayed after school, he went on. Not once, not twice, every week, helping me catch up, even when I didn't think it mattered. His voice didn't break. That was the part that hit hardest. It wasn't dramatic. It was certain. She drove me to my first scholarship interview, he said. Told me to sit up straight. Told me I belonged there even when I didn't believe it. I swallowed, because I remembered that day. He had barely spoken the entire drive. But when we got there, he didn't run. And that had been enough. I'm a second-year resident in pediatric surgery now, Marcus said. A ripple moved through the room. Not loud, but felt. And the reason I'm standing here, he paused, just for a second, is because one person decided I wasn't invisible. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, real. She didn't save my life with some big moment, he said. She did it in small ways, quiet ways, every single day. My vision blurred slightly, not overwhelming, just enough to remind me this was real. I don't know if teachers hear this enough, Marcus added, looking out at the room, but what you do stays. He turned back to me. And it matters more than you think. The applause didn't come right away. It built. Slow, then stronger. Then it filled the entire room. But I barely heard it. Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the award. I wasn't thinking about my family. I was thinking about every day I had shown up, not knowing if any of it would ever lead here. And realizing it already had. The applause kept going longer than I expected. It didn't feel like the kind people give out of obligation. It felt earned, layered. Like every person in that room understood something they hadn't fully put into words before. I stood there, hands lightly clasped in front of me, trying to steady my breathing. Marcus stepped away from the microphone, but before he returned to his seat, he glanced at me one more time. Not dramatic, not emotional, just a small nod. And somehow, that meant more than anything else, because it wasn't gratitude. It was acknowledgement, the kind that says, "You did what you were supposed to do." The host returned to the stage, his voice measured, giving the room a moment to settle. "Thank you, Marcus," he said, "for reminding us what education truly looks like." I exhaled slowly, because something inside me had just shifted again. Not upward, not into pride, into clarity. For so long I had wondered if what I did was enough. If staying late, noticing the quiet ones, choosing patience when it would have been easier not to, actually mattered. And now, standing there, I realized it had never been small. It had just been unseen. The host continued speaking, moving toward the final moment of the evening. The selection committee has reviewed hundreds of nominations from across the country. His words blurred slightly at the edges. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I wasn't holding on to the outcome anymore. That part had quietly let go. Beside me, Priya reached for my hand again. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you already know." I nodded. Because I did. Michael shifted slightly on my other side, exhaling through a small smile. David looked straight ahead, still composed, still grounded. 4 people. 4 different stories. One shared understanding. The envelope appeared in the host's hands. Cream-colored. Formal. Almost identical to the one that had been sitting on my kitchen table just days ago. Funny how something so small could carry so much weight. The National Teacher of the Year. He paused. The room leaned in, not physically, but you could feel it. A held breath, across hundreds of people. I didn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. Is Emily Carter, from Philadelphia. The sound that followed didn't feel real at first. Applause. Rising fast. People standing. Movement everywhere. But for a second, I didn't move. Not out of shock, out of stillness. Because something inside me wasn't asking, did I win? It was saying, you already had. Priya squeezed my hand tightly. Go, she said, laughing softly. Go. I stepped forward. Not rushed. Not frozen. Just steady. Each step toward the podium felt clear, grounded, like I wasn't walking into something new. I was stepping into something I had been building for years. When I reached the stage, the Secretary of Education extended his hand. Congratulations, Miss Carter, he said. I shook it, nodded once, and accepted the award. The weight of it was real, solid, but not overwhelming, because the moment itself wasn't about holding something. It was about understanding something. I turned toward the audience. Thousands of faces, lights, cameras, and right there, front row, Grandma Evelyn, standing, hands together, eyes filled, but steady, always steady. And in that moment, I knew exactly what mattered. Not who didn't come, not who laughed, not who stayed silent, just this. This truth, this life, this path I chose. And if something in this moment feels familiar to you, this quiet realization that your worth was never dependent on who failed to see it, then stay with this story. Strength doesn't beg, it builds. Subscribe. The applause didn't stop when I reached the podium. It followed me, not loudly, not overwhelmingly, but steadily, like something that had already been decided long before this moment. I stood there, the award in my hands, the microphone just inches away, and for a brief second, everything slowed. This was the part I had practiced. The safe speech. The one with statistics, polished phrases, and carefully structured gratitude. It was still there, in my mind, waiting. But something in me had already moved past it. I looked out at the audience again. Rows of faces. People who understood. People who didn't need convincing. And then, without meaning to, my eyes shifted just slightly toward the main camera. A quiet thought passed through me. Somewhere, they might be watching. My father. My mother. Victoria. Not in a crowded ballroom. Not sitting proudly in the front row, but somewhere else. Maybe at a dinner table. Maybe distracted. Maybe still believing this was something small. I let that thought pass, not pushed away. Just released. Because this moment wasn't about them. It never had been. I leaned toward the microphone. When I was growing up, I began, my voice calm, steady. I was told that teaching wasn't a real career. The room shifted slightly. Not uncomfortable. Attentive. I was told it meant I wasn't aiming high enough, I continued. That I was choosing something. Less. I paused. Not for effect. Just to let the words sit. For a long time I believed that. There was no rush in my voice. No need to defend. Just truth. I thought success had to look a certain way, I said. Sound a certain way. Be measured in ways that were easy to explain. A few heads nodded. Small movements. But real. And I spent years trying to prove that what I was doing mattered. I exhaled softly. But the truth is, I glanced toward the front row again. Grandma Evelyn didn't move, didn't nod. She just watched. Fully present? It already did. The room went completely still. Because sometimes the simplest realization carries the most weight. I didn't need everyone to understand it, I continued. I just needed to keep showing up. Images flickered through my mind. Classrooms. Late nights. Students who never said thank you but stayed. Moments that looked small, but weren't. To every teacher watching tonight, I said, what you do matters even when no one applauds it. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Even when it's overlooked. Even when it's misunderstood. I paused again, then added quietly. Especially then, there was a shift in the room. Not applause. Not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. I looked back into the camera, just for a second. Not to send a message. Not to prove anything. Just to speak clearly. To anyone who's ever been told their path wasn't enough. I let the sentence rest there. Then finished it. You don't need permission to believe in what you've built. Silence. Then, the applause came back. Not louder, but fuller. And this time, I didn't feel like I was receiving it. I felt like I understood it. The applause faded slowly this time. Not because people were less moved, because they were holding on to something. I stepped back from the microphone, the weight of the award still steady in my hands, and for a moment, I just stood there. Not waiting. Not searching. Just present. The host returned, saying something about closing remarks, about honoring all finalists, about the future of education. I heard it, but it didn't need to stay, because the moment that mattered had already happened. I stepped down from the stage. The lights softened. The space shifted from ceremony to movement, people standing, turning, reaching out. Hands extended. Congratulations. Incredible speech. Well deserved. Voices came one after another, warm, sincere, but I noticed something quietly. I wasn't overwhelmed by it. A week ago, I might have tried to hold on to every word, to memorize them, to carry them home as proof. Now, I let them pass through. Not because they didn't matter, but because I didn't need them the same way anymore. Marcus found me first. "Hi," he said, a little more unsure now than he had been on stage. I smiled. "Hi." For a second, we just looked at each other, two people standing at very different points in life, connected by something neither of us had fully named before. "You didn't have to say all that," I told him gently. He shook his head. "I did. Simple, certain. I just said what was true." I nodded. Because that's what it had been. Not a speech. Not a performance. Just truth, spoken out loud. "You changed things for me," he added, in ways I didn't even understand until later. There it was again. That quiet realization teachers rarely get to witness. The outcome. Not in grades. Not in reports. But in lives. "You did the work," I said. He gave a small smile. "I had someone who didn't let me disappear. That stayed with me. Not because it was praise. Because it was responsibility. The kind you carry without ever being asked to." We stood there for another moment before he was pulled away by someone calling his name. And just like that, he was gone again. Back into his life, back into the person he had become. I turned and saw her. Grandma Evelyn was already walking toward me. Not rushing. Not emotional in a way that drew attention. Just steady. Always steady. When she reached me, she didn't speak right away. She placed one hand lightly over mine, the one holding the award. Then she looked at me. Really looked. "I told you," she said softly. I let out a small breath, something between a laugh and something deeper. "You did." She nodded once. Not proud in a loud way. Not surprised. Just certain. Around us, the room continued conversations, movement, celebration. But in that small space between us, everything felt quiet again. Grounded. Complete. Not because something had been won, but because something had finally been understood. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about who wasn't there. I wasn't wondering if they had seen it. I wasn't waiting for anything to come next. I just stood there, holding what I had built. And knowing. It had always been enough. The calls started before I even left the ballroom. I didn't hear them at first. My phone was tucked away in my clutch, buried under everything else: lipstick, folded notes, things that suddenly felt unimportant. But eventually, the vibration broke through. Once. Twice. Then again. I stepped slightly to the side, away from the flow of people, and pulled it out. "Dad." "Missed call." "Mom." "Missed call." "Victoria." 3 calls in a row. Then more. Voicemails stacking. Messages coming in faster than I could read them. I stared at the screen for a moment. Not shocked. Not confused. Just aware. Because some reactions don't need explanation. They only arrive when the world is watching. I turned the phone over again. "Not ready. Not yet. There are moments that belong to you. And answering too quickly can pull you right out of them." I wasn't going to let that happen. The reception that followed blurred slightly at the edges. Champagne glasses, soft conversations, people introducing themselves with titles that used to intimidate me. Now, they didn't. Because for the first time, I wasn't measuring myself against them. I was simply standing in my own place. "Miss Carter," someone said. I turned. A woman extended her hand. "I'm with CNN. We'd love to speak with you tomorrow." I nodded politely. "Of course." Another person approached, then another. Each conversation respectful. Each interaction grounded in something I had spent years building quietly, without knowing if it would ever be seen like this. And still, none of it felt overwhelming. Because it wasn't new. It was just visible now. Hours later, I returned to my hotel room. The quiet greeted me again, just like the night before. Only now, it felt different. Full. I set the award carefully on the table near the window. The city lights reflected faintly across its surface. For a moment, I just stood there. Then I picked up my phone again. 82 missed calls. More messages than I could scroll through in one pass. I opened the first voicemail. "Dad. Emily, I just saw. Call me back." His voice wasn't angry, wasn't dismissive. It was something I had never heard from him before. Uncertain. I didn't play the rest. I moved to the next. "Mom. Sweetheart, we didn't realize. We're so proud of you." I stopped that one too. Then Victoria. "Emily, you should have told us it was this big. This is all over the news." I let the phone drop gently onto the bed. Because that was the part that settled everything. "You should have told us." I had. They just hadn't listened. I walked back to the window, folding my arms loosely, looking out over the city again. Somewhere, miles away, they were trying to reach me, trying to step into a moment they had already chosen to miss. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to let them in right away. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but because this quiet, this clarity, this space where I finally belonged to my own life, deserved to be protected. At least for tonight. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because my mind was racing, but because it wasn't. Everything felt unusually still, like the part of me that had been waiting hoping for something to shift had finally stopped. Morning light came softly through the window. I made coffee, stood barefoot on the hotel carpet, and watched the city wake up below me. My phone sat on the table, quiet now. Not because the messages had stopped, because I hadn't opened them. There's a difference. I picked it up slowly, scrolling this time without urgency. More missed calls. More texts. Some longer, some shorter. All saying the same thing in different ways. "We didn't know. We're proud of you. Call us." I paused on that first message again. "You should have told us." A small breath left my chest. Because the truth was simple. I had told them, clearly, carefully. Honestly, they just didn't think it mattered. I set the phone back down and took a sip of coffee. Warm, steady, real. Outside, the city moved forward like it always did, unaware of what had changed inside one person standing by a window. And that was the quietest realization of all. Nothing around me needed to change, because everything inside me already had. I didn't call them that day. Not because I was trying to prove a point, but because, for the first time, I understood something I hadn't before. Timing matters. And so does readiness. I spent the morning moving through things slowly. Breakfast in the hotel cafe. A short walk past buildings I had only seen in photos. A quiet conversation with one of the coordinators about the next day's interviews. Normal things. Simple things. But they felt different. Because I wasn't carrying that constant weight anymore, the one that asked, "Are you enough yet?" By the afternoon I was back in my room. My phone lit up again. This time, I answered. "Mom." "Emily," she said immediately, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "We saw everything." I didn't respond right away. Not to be cold. Just to let the moment be real. "It was beautiful," she added. "Your speech. That young man Marcus." I leaned against the window. "Yeah," I said quietly. "We didn't understand," she continued. "We thought it was just—" "I know what you thought," I said, gently but clearly. She stopped. And in that pause, something shifted. Not dramatic. Not fixed. Just acknowledged. "We're proud of you," she said again. I closed my eyes for a second. Because 6 months ago, that sentence would have undone me. Now, it just existed. "Thank you," I replied. And for the first time, it wasn't something I had been waiting to hear. It was just something they were finally ready to say. Victoria called later that evening. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me said, "Answer." "Emily," she said, a little too quickly. "I tried calling last night." I saw. There was a pause. Not long, just enough to feel unfamiliar. "I didn't realize how big this was," she said. "The coverage, the speech, everything." I leaned back in the chair, letting her words settle without rushing to respond. "You read the invitation," I said calmly. Another pause. Longer this time. "I thought," she started then stopped. I guess I didn't take it seriously. That was the closest thing to honesty I had ever heard from her. "I know," I said. She exhaled softly. "I posted something last night. People started commenting. Things got out of hand." I wasn't surprised. Consequences don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they just show up. "I'm sorry," she added. The words felt unfamiliar coming from her. Not dramatic, not defensive, just there. I didn't rush to accept it. Didn't reject it either. "Okay," I said. And for once that was enough. Not forgiveness. Not resolution. Just a moment where the truth was finally allowed to exist between us without being reshaped. I flew home 2 days later. Same airport. Same routine, but everything felt different. Not bigger. Not louder, just clearer. When I unlocked my apartment door, the familiar quiet greeted me again. The same space, the same walls, the same life I had built, piece by piece. Only now, I saw it differently. Not as something small, not as something I had to explain, but as something complete. I set my bag down, placed the award on the shelf beside my students' letters, and stood there for a moment. Two worlds, side by side. Both real. Both earned. My phone buzzed softly in my hand. A new message. Dad, I was wrong. About you. About everything. I'm sorry. I read it once. Then again. And gently, I set the phone down. Not rushing. Not reacting. Because this time, I didn't need the moment to define me. I had already defined myself. And maybe that's the quiet truth in all of this. Sometimes people see your worth too late. And sometimes, that's okay. Because the most important part was never them seeing you. It was you finally seeing yourself. And if you understand what quiet strength feels like, you belong here.